Jake Morrison adjusted his simple black suit and looked around the massive chamber that could hold 10,000 beings. The Galactic Council meeting hall stretched so far in every direction that he needed the electronic display in his chair to see the speakers clearly. Hundreds of different alien species filled the curved rows of seats, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors, sizes, and shapes that still amazed him after 3 years as Earth's representative. The air recycling system worked overtime to accommodate so many different atmospheric requirements. Jake breathed the standard oxygen mix that most carbon-based species used, but he could see the methane breathers in their sealed sections and the silicon-based entities that glowed softly in their special chambers. The smell was a mixture of ozone, various gases, and something that reminded him of his grandmother's flower garden back in Ohio. He sat alone in the human section, which consisted of exactly one chair. Around him, other species had dozens or even hundreds of representatives. The Corvani delegation filled an entire section with their blue-scaled bodies and ceremonial armor. The Vekmal had brought their entire ruling council, 47 insect-like beings that clicked and hummed in constant communication. Even the peaceful Zephyrians had 12 representatives, their bird-like forms perched on specially designed stands. Jake had been Earth's only voice in galactic politics for 3 years now. Ever since humanity joined the Council, he had learned to speak carefully, to listen more than he talked, and to never show surprise at the strange customs of alien cultures. Today felt different, though. The emergency session had been called with only 6 hours' notice, and the agenda was marked as Category Alpha, the highest level of importance. The great crystal being known as Council Prime Zethkar rose from the central platform. His body was made of what looked like living diamond, 12 feet tall, and constantly shifting between different colors. When he spoke, his voice came from speakers throughout the chamber, translated instantly into every language known to the galaxy. We gather today to address a growing concern that threatens the stability our ancestors built over 2,000 years ago, Zethkar announced. The species known as humans have expanded their territory and influence at an unprecedented rate. In just 50 years of space travel, they have established colonies on 37 worlds and built a military fleet that rivals civilizations with millennia of experience. Jake felt his stomach tighten. He had expected this day would come, but he had hoped for more time. Earth's rapid expansion had been necessary for survival, not conquest. When humanity first reached the stars, they had found a galaxy full of dangers. Pirates attacked their early colony ships. Hostile species destroyed 2 entire settlements before Earth even knew they existed. The human military grew strong because it had to. The humans have disrupted established trade routes, continued the Veltar representative, a creature that looked like a giant sea anemone with dozens of waving tentacles. Their cargo ships move faster than our regulations allow. Their merchants undercut prices that have been stable for centuries. They refuse to follow protocols that every other species accepts without question. Other representatives began to speak. The Corvani complained that human colonists had settled on worlds that were clearly meant for future Corvani expansion, even though the planets had been empty and unclaimed for thousands of years. The Vekmal were upset that human scientists had developed new technologies without submitting them to the Council for approval first. The Zephyrians worried that human entertainment broadcasts were influencing their youth to ask uncomfortable questions about their rigid social structure. Jake listened to each complaint and felt his jaw muscles tighten. Every criticism was the same. Humans were successful, and success made other species uncomfortable. Earth's colonies prospered because humans worked hard and helped each other. Human ships were fast because Earth's engineers never stopped improving their designs. Human merchants offered better prices because they operated efficiently instead of maintaining bloated bureaucracies. The solution is clear, announced General Vexhai, the chief representative of the Corvani military. His scales shifted to a deep red color that Jake had learned meant aggression. The humans must be brought under proper control before they destabilize our entire civilization. Council Prime Zethkar's crystal form flashed through several colors before settling on a deep purple that meant formal declaration. After careful consideration and consultation with our most experienced advisors, the Council has developed the stabilization tax. This measure will ensure that humanity's rapid growth does not threaten the peace and order that has existed for 2 millennia. Jake felt the blood drain from his face as the terms appeared on his personal display. The Council wanted Earth to surrender 60% of its military vessels immediately. 45% of human colonies would be placed under Council administration, which meant other species would take control of worlds that humans had built from nothing. Most insulting of all, Earth would pay an annual tribute of 30% of its total economic output to fund galactic stability programs. These terms are not negotiable, Zethkar continued. They are based on careful analysis of galactic economic models and historical precedents. Every species that has joined our council has accepted similar arrangements. The humans will do the same. The chamber filled with sounds of agreement. Clicks, hums, whistles, and various other noises that Jake's translator converted into words of support. Some species seemed genuinely convinced that the tax was necessary for peace. Others clearly saw an opportunity to claim human territory and resources for themselves. A few appeared uncomfortable but said nothing. Jake thought about the colonies he had visited in his role as Earth's representative. New California, where former refugees from Earth's climate disasters had built beautiful cities powered by clean energy. New Tokyo, where the best minds from Earth worked alongside alien scientists to solve problems that benefited everyone. Garden World, where human farmers grew food that now fed dozens of species across the galaxy. He thought about the human ships in the defense fleet, many of them crewed by young men and women who had left Earth to protect the colonies their parents had built. He thought about Captain Roy Stevens, who had saved a Zephyrian passenger ship from pirates last month and refused any reward. He thought about Admiral Ben Rodriguez, who had turned the human fleet into a force that protected not just Earth's interests but also defended smaller species from aggressive neighbors. Ambassador Morrison, Council Prime Zethkar said, his voice cutting through Jake's thoughts, "You will now formally accept these terms on behalf of your species." Jake stood slowly. Around him, thousands of alien representatives turned their attention to the lone human in the vast chamber. He could feel their expectations, their certainty that he would do what every other species had done when faced with council authority. He could see the recording devices that would broadcast his words to every corner of the galaxy. He thought about his daughter Kelly, who was studying engineering on Mars. He thought about his son Danny, who served as a communications officer on a deep space exploration vessel. He thought about his wife Susan, who worked as a teacher in the orbital stations around Earth, helping children from dozens of different species learn to work together. He thought about the principles that had driven humanity to the stars, the idea that people should be free to make their own choices, the belief that hard work and innovation should be rewarded, not punished, the conviction that no one had the right to demand submission simply because they were powerful. Jake looked around the chamber one more time. He saw species that had forgotten what it meant to stand up for themselves. He saw civilizations that had traded their freedom for the promise of security. He saw a galaxy that had grown comfortable with the idea that some beings were born to rule and others were born to serve. The human representative took a deep breath and spoke clearly into the silence. "No." The word hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Jake Morrison remained standing, his hands steady at his sides as 10,000 alien beings processed what they had just heard. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before the chaos began. The Dekmal delegation erupted in clicking sounds so rapid that the translation system couldn't keep up. Several Corvani representatives stood up, their scales shifting to bright orange in what Jake recognized as extreme agitation. The Zephyrians began making high-pitched whistling sounds that meant panic in their language. Even the usually calm silicon-based entities flickered with confused light patterns. Council Prime Zethkar's crystal form shifted through color so quickly that it created a rainbow effect. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a tone that Jake had never heard before. "Ambassador Morrison, surely you misspoke. The translation system must have made an error." Jake looked directly at the towering crystal being and spoke again, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "I said no, the translation was correct." A new wave of noise filled the chamber. This time the sounds were different. Some species made noises of shock and disbelief. Others seemed confused, as if they couldn't understand what the word meant in this context. A few made sounds that the translator marked as untranslatable emotional response. The Veltar representative's tentacles waved frantically. "This is impossible. No species has ever refused a council directive. The protocols do not even have procedures for such a situation." General Vexhai, the Corvani military leader, stepped forward from his delegation. His scales had turned deep red, and his clawed hands opened and closed in what Jake knew was a threat display. "Human, you clearly do not understand the gravity of this situation. The Council's decision is final. Your compliance is not optional." Jake turned to face the General directly. "I understand perfectly, General. You want my people to give up most of our ships, surrender nearly half our colonies, and pay you a huge tribute every year. You want us to accept being made weak and dependent on your council. My answer is still no." The chamber fell silent again. This time the silence felt dangerous. Jake could see alien faces that had never encountered direct defiance before. Some looked confused, others angry, and a few seemed almost frightened by the concept of refusal. Council Prime Zeth Kar S form settled into a deep purple that Jake's cultural briefings had taught him meant formal authority. "Ambassador Morrison, perhaps you need time to consider the consequences of your words. The Council has the combined military might of 47 species. Earth has a single world and a few dozen colonies. You cannot possibly believe that resistance is wise." Jake felt something stir inside him, something that came from deep in humanity's past. It was the same feeling that had driven humans to leave caves and build cities, the same spirit that had pushed them to cross oceans and reach for the stars. It was the absolute refusal to bow down to bullies, no matter how powerful they seemed. "Counselor," Jake said, his voice growing stronger, "let me tell you something about humans. We didn't survive ice ages and predators and natural disasters by giving up when things looked impossible. We didn't reach the stars by accepting that other people knew better than us about our own lives. And we sure didn't build our colonies and our fleet just to hand them over to a committee of bureaucrats." He walked forward, moving closer to the central platform where the council leadership sat. Every step echoed in the now silent chamber. "You want to know why humans expanded so fast? It's because we had to. When we first left Earth, we found a galaxy full of dangers. Pirates destroyed our ships. Hostile species attacked our colonies. We built our military to protect ourselves, not to threaten anyone else." The human representative stopped at the barrier that separated the speaker's area from the general seating. "You want to know why our colonies prosper? It's because we work hard and help each other. When a human colony needs food, other human worlds send it. When a human ship breaks down, other human ships stop to help. We don't wait for committees to make decisions. We see a problem and we fix it." Jake's voice carried throughout the chamber. As he continued, "You want to know why our merchants offer better prices? It's because we don't waste money on huge bureaucracies that take months to make simple decisions. We build things efficiently, we work honestly, we compete fairly, and apparently that scares you enough to try to rob us." The Zephyrian representative, a bird-like being named Trilhai, spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. "But Ambassador Morrison, the stability of the galaxy depends on established order. Your species grows too quickly, you change too much. This disrupts the harmony we have maintained for centuries." Jake turned to face the Zephyrian. "Trilhai, I've read your species' history. 200 years ago, your people were explorers and inventors. Your ships were the fastest in the galaxy. Your cities were centers of learning and art. Now you live in the same buildings your great-grandparents built, following the same rules they followed, thinking the same thoughts they thought. Is that really the harmony you want to protect? The Zephyrian's feathers ruffled, but he said nothing. Jake could see in his large eyes something that might have been recognition or even longing. The truth is, Jake continued, addressing the entire chamber, you're not afraid of humans disrupting your stability. You're afraid of us reminding your people what they used to be? You're afraid that if we succeed by being free and independent, your own citizens might start wondering why they need to ask permission for everything. The Corvani general's scales turned almost black with rage. You speak of freedom, human. But freedom without order leads to chaos. The council system has prevented major wars for 2,000 years. Would you destroy that for your pride? Jake looked at the general and smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. General, you prevented wars by making sure nobody was strong enough to fight back. That's not peace. That's just a very large prison. And now you're upset because the humans haven't learned to act like prisoners yet. He turned back to council. Prime Zethkar. You want to know what's really going to happen here? I'm going to walk out of this chamber and go back to Earth. I'm going to tell my people exactly what you demanded and exactly what I told you. Then we're going to continue. Building our colonies, protecting our ships, and living our lives the way we choose to live them. The crystal being's form flashed through several colors rapidly. Ambassador Morrison, you cannot simply ignore the Council's authority. We have laws, we have procedures. We have the power to enforce our decisions. Jake walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. When he reached the doorway, he turned back one final time. Counselor, you have procedures for dealing with species that ask permission. You have laws that work on people who accept your right to make those laws. You have power over civilizations that agree to be governed by you. He paused, making sure. His words would be recorded clearly by every device in the chamber. But you don't have procedures for dealing with people who look you in the eye and tell you to go to hell. You don't have laws that can force free people to become slaves. And you don't have power over anyone who refuses to recognize your authority. The human representative stepped through the doorway, then looked back one more time. Humanity didn't crawl out of caves, survive ice ages, and reach for the stars just to bow to a committee of bureaucrats. We've been saying no to bullies for thousands of years. Today won't be any different. Jake Morrison walked out of the Galactic Council chamber, leaving behind 10,000 alien beings, who had just encountered something they had never seen before, a species that refused to be conquered, controlled, or intimidated in the silence. That followed. More than a few representatives began to remember what their own ancestors had been like before they learned to submit to authority. The human had said no. And somehow that single word had changed everything. The news of humanity's refusal spread across the galaxy faster than anyone had expected. Within hours of Jake Morrison's dramatic exit from the council chamber, communication networks buzzed with reports, recordings, and heated discussions on thousands of worlds. Beings who had never heard of humans before suddenly found themselves talking about the species that had said no to the most powerful authority in the galaxy, on Earth. President Lisa Carter stood in the Oval Office of the Global Assembly Building, watching news feeds from across human space. Her advisors surrounded her, their faces showing a mixture of pride and terror. The small display screens showed reactions from dozens of different species, and most of them were not friendly. "Madam President," said Secretary of Defense Frank Taylor, "the Council has begun mobilizing military forces. Our intelligence sources report that at least 30 species have committed ships to what they're calling the Combined Fleet. We're looking at the largest military force assembled in recorded galactic history." Lisa nodded, her expression calm. Despite the storm brewing around humanity, she had known this day would come when she approved Jake Morrison's instructions. The human government had debated for months about how to respond if the Council made demands. Every simulation had shown the same result. Submission would mean the slow death of human independence, while resistance would mean immediate war. How many ships are we talking about, Frank? Conservative estimates put the combined fleet at over 3,000 vessels, ma'am. Everything from small patrol ships to massive battle cruisers. The Kovani are sending their entire third fleet. The Veltar have committed 200 ships. Even species we considered neutral are sending forces. Lisa walked to the window and looked out at the city below. People went about their daily lives, unaware that their entire civilization hung in the balance. Children played in parks that might be bombed in a few weeks. Workers built projects that might never be finished. Families made plans for futures that might never come. And our fleet, Frank? 300 ships, ma'am. Admiral Rodriguez has recalled every vessel from patrol duty. We're bringing in the Colonial Defense Forces and even some of the older ships from the reserve fleet. But the numbers ... I know the numbers, Lisa said quietly. 10-to-1 odds, maybe worse. On the other side of the galaxy, Admiral Ben Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, humanity's newest and most advanced battleship. The ship orbited Kepler Station, the main human military base in the outer colonies. Through the bridge windows, he could see the human fleet assembling in formation. 300 ships against 3,000 seemed like suicide, but Rodriguez had studied human military history. Humans had won impossible battles before. "Status report, Commander," Rodriguez said to his second-in-command, Commander Kate Phillips. "Oh. Ships are responding to the recall order, sir. The Colonial Defense Forces will be here within 6 hours. We're also getting volunteers from the Merchant Marine and even some civilian ships that want to help with supplies and communications." Rodriguez nodded. The human fleet might be outnumbered, but it had something the Council forces lacked. Everyone was here by choice. No one had been ordered to fight for bureaucrats and politicians they had never met. Every human ship in the fleet was crewed by people defending their homes, their families, and their freedom. "Sir," said the communications officer, "we're getting reports from across the galaxy. It's not just the Council mobilizing. There are some ... unusual developments." Rodriguez turned to face the young officer. "What kind of developments?" "The Talvaxi have declared their independence from the Council, sir. They're saying that if humans can refuse Council authority, so can they. There are also reports of unrest on several Rexney worlds. And, sir, we're picking up coded transmissions that suggest some Council species are having problems with their own military forces." The Admiral raised an eyebrow. "What kind of problems?" "Mutinies, sir. Ships refusing orders to attack humans. Some crews are saying they won't fire on a species that's only crime was refusing to be robbed." On the distant world of Talvax Prime, General Korvik stood before a gathering of his people in the ancient mountain fortress that had been their symbol of resistance for centuries. The Talvaxi looked like humans might if they had evolved from reptiles instead of mammals. They were tall, strong, and had never forgotten what it meant to fight for freedom. "Brothers and sisters," Korvik said, his voice carrying across the crowded chamber, "for 300 years we have lived under Council rule. We have paid their taxes, followed their laws, and watched our children grow up as subjects instead of citizens. We told ourselves it was the price of peace." The crowd murmured agreement. The Talvaxi had been warriors before the Council conquered them. They had submitted only after their homeworld was threatened with destruction. "Today, a species called humans has shown us something we had forgotten," Korvik continued. "They have shown us that it is possible to look at power and say no. They have reminded us that freedom is not a gift from authority, it is a right that must be defended." The general raised his clawed hand, and the crowd fell silent. The humans face impossible odds. The Council will send thousands of ships to crush them, but they chose to fight rather than surrender their independence. Can we do less? The roar of approval that followed could be heard for miles. Within hours, the Talvaxi rebellion fleet, thought destroyed centuries ago, emerged from hidden bases throughout their system. Ships that had been disguised as mining vessels and cargo haulers revealed their true nature as warships. The Talvaxi had been preparing for this moment for 300 years. On the industrial world of Rexney 7, factory worker Vextel watched news feeds of the human crisis during his lunch break. The Rexney looked like a cross between humans and insects with 4 arms and compound eyes. They had been conquered by the Council not through military force, but through economic pressure. Their homeworld had been strip-mined to provide raw materials for Council projects, and their people had been reduced to cheap labor. They really said no? Asked Vextel's friend, Kravhai. They really said no, Vextel confirmed. One word. No, and now the entire galaxy is talking about it? Kravhai clicked his mandibles in what humans would recognize as nervous laughter. I have been working in these factories for 20 years. 20 years of making parts for Council ships that patrol our own system. 20 years of watching our children grow up to be workers instead of engineers. 20 years of being told that this is the price of stability. Vextal looked around the break room. Other workers were listening to the same news feeds, their compound eyes reflecting the same thoughts. The humans were facing extinction for refusing to surrender their freedom. Meanwhile, the Frexni had surrendered their freedom long ago and lived as slaves with better living conditions. What if we stopped? Vextal asked quietly. Stopped what? Stopped making parts for their ships. Stopped mining materials for their projects. Stopped accepting that we have to live as subjects in our own system. The idea spread through the factory like wildfire. By the end of the day, production had stopped on 17 different worlds. The Frexni workers didn't make speeches or issue declarations. They simply stopped working for their oppressors. Back on Earth, President Carter addressed the Global Assembly and the human colonies. Her speech was broadcast to every human settlement and picked up by intelligence services across the galaxy. My fellow humans, she began, we stand at a crossroads. Behind us lies the path of submission, where we accept that our children will grow up as subjects of an alien authority. Ahead lies the path of resistance, where we fight for the right to determine our own destiny. She paused, letting her words sink in. I will not lie to you. The odds are not in our favor. We face enemies who outnumber us 10 to 1. We face species with thousands of years of military experience. We face the possibility that our colonies will be destroyed and our homeworld conquered. The president's voice grew stronger. But we also face the possibility of something else. We face the possibility of showing the galaxy that freedom is not dead. We face the possibility of proving that no committee of bureaucrats has the right to demand submission from free people. We face the possibility of victory. She looked directly into the camera. Our ancestors left Earth to build something better among the stars. They didn't come this far to surrender to the first bully who demanded tribute. Neither will we. The human fleet prepared for battle, knowing that the next few days would determine not just their own fate, but the fate of freedom itself in the galaxy. They had said no to tyranny. Now they would have to prove that no meant no. Captain Roy Stevens gripped the arms of his command chair as the UES Defiant dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler asteroid field. Through the bridge windows he could see the most terrifying sight in galactic history. 3,000. Enemy ships arranged in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming like deadly stars against the black of space. My God, whispered his tactical officer, Lieutenant Sam Carter. There are so many of them. Roy had commanded the Defiant for 5 years, fighting pirates and protecting human colonies. He had seen combat before, but nothing like this. The combined fleet stretched across space like a metal ocean. Corvani battlecruisers the size of city blocks. Veltar dreadnoughts that could crack a moon in half. Vekmal swarm ships that moved like deadly insects. Ship after ship after ship representing the combined military might of 47 different species. Sir, called the communications officer, Admiral Rodriguez is requesting all captains to check in. Roy activated his comm unit. Around him, 300 human ships reported their status. Destroyers like his own Defiant. Heavy cruisers built for long-range combat. Fast attack ships designed to hit hard and escape quickly. Even a few converted cargo vessels that had been fitted with weapons by volunteers who refused to sit out. The fight. All ships, this is Admiral Rodriguez, came the familiar voice from the flagship Liberty. I know what you're all seeing out there. I know it looks impossible. But remember why we're here. We're not fighting for politicians or bureaucrats. We're fighting for the right of our children to grow up free. Roy looked around his bridge crew. Young men and women who had volunteered to serve in the human fleet. They could have stayed home, found safe jobs, lived quiet lives. Instead, they had chosen to stand between their people and the largest military force in galactic history. "Sir," said Lieutenant Carter, studying her tactical display, "the enemy fleet is beginning to advance. They're moving in standard council. Formation, heavy ships in the center, fast attack craft on the flanks, support vessels in the rear." Roy smiled grimly. The council forces were fighting like they always fought, by the book, following procedures that had been written centuries ago. They expected the humans to line up and trade shots like gentlemen. They were about to learn that humans didn't fight like gentlemen when their survival was at stake. "All ships," Admiral Rodriguez's voice continued, "execute Battle Plan Alpha. We're going into the asteroid field. Let's see how well they follow their precious procedures when we make our own rules." The human fleet scattered like startled birds, diving into the massive asteroid field that gave the battle its name. Roy guided the Defiant between chunks of rock the size of buildings, using his ship's superior maneuverability to weave through spaces that larger vessels couldn't follow. Behind them, the combined fleet struggled to maintain formation. The council commanders had trained for battles in open space, where massive ships could bring their full firepower to bear. The asteroid field broke up their careful formations and forced them to split into smaller groups. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, called the sensor officer. 3 Corvani destroyers breaking formation to pursue us." Roy felt the familiar calm that came over him in combat. "Helm, take us deeper into the field. Weapons, prepare torpedo spread. Let's give them a lesson in human tactics." The Defiant dove between 2 massive asteroids, the Corvani ships following close behind. The enemy vessels were larger and more heavily armed, but they flew like they were afraid of scratching their paint. Roy waited until the perfect moment, then ordered his ship to spin around and fire. 6 torpedoes streaked through space. Their warheads designed by human engineers who believed in making things that worked instead of things that looked impressive. 2 of the Corvani ships exploded immediately. The third lost its main engines and drifted helplessly into an asteroid. 3 ships down, Roy reported to the fleet. Defiant continuing the hunt. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as human ships used the asteroid field like a 3-dimensional maze. Captain Ellen Walsh in the cruiser Independence led a squadron of destroyers in a devastating attack on a Veltar formation. Commander Pete Johnson used his fast attack ship, Ranger, to cripple 2 enemy vessels before they even knew he was there, but the human fleet was taking losses too. Roy watched in horror as the destroyer Valiant took a direct hit from a Thekmal heavy cruiser and broke apart in a ball of fire. The crew of 47 people he had known personally, including Captain Mike Torres, who had a wife and 2 kids back on New Earth. "Sir," called the communications officer, "we're getting reports of new contacts jumping into the system." Unknown configuration. Roy felt his heart sink. If the council had brought reinforcements, the battle was already over. The human fleet couldn't handle the forces they were already fighting, let alone fresh enemy ships. Then the sensor readings came in, and Roy couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Sir, the new contacts are Talvaxi ships." "Repeat, Talvaxi Rebellion fleet entering the battle zone." Roy whooped with joy as dozens of sleek Talvaxi warships dropped out of hyperspace and immediately engaged the nearest council forces. The reptilian warriors had hidden these ships for 3 centuries, waiting for the right moment to strike back at their oppressors. "This is General Korvik of the Free Talvaxi Fleet," came a new voice on the communication channels. "Humans, we stand with you. Today we all fight for freedom." The tide of battle began to shift. The Talvaxi ships fought with a savagery that shocked even the humans. Their crews had been waiting 300 years for revenge, and they threw themselves at the council forces with desperate courage. More ships arrived. Frexni industrial vessels that had been secretly converted into fighting ships. Even some council species whose crews had mutinied rather than fire on beings fighting for their freedom. The massive enemy fleet found itself fighting on multiple Fronts against enemies who refused to follow the established rules of warfare. Roy guided the Defiant through another attack run, destroying a Corvani supply ship that exploded in a shower of debris. Around him, the battle raged with an intensity that would be remembered for centuries. Ships died in brilliant flashes of light. Captains made split-second decisions that saved or doomed their crews. Heroes were born and legends were made among the drifting asteroids. "Sir," called Lieutenant Carter, "the enemy flagship is moving toward Admiral Rodriguez. It looks like they're trying to end this by taking out our command ship." Roy looked at his tactical display and saw the massive Veltar dreadnought Harmony of Worlds pushing through the asteroid field toward the Liberty. The enemy ship was 3 times the size of the human flagship and carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. "All ships, this is Admiral Rodriguez," came the calm voice of the human commander. "Harmony of Worlds is approaching our position." "I'm going to ram her." Roy felt his blood freeze. "Sir, this is Captain Stevens. The Liberty can't take on that dreadnought alone." "Negative, Captain. I won't ask other ships to make a suicide run. The Liberty will handle this." Roy looked around his bridge crew and saw the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his heart. "Admiral, this is the Defiant. We're with you." "This is Captain Walsh on the Independence. We're coming too." "Ranger standing by. Defender ready. Courage here." One by one, every remaining human ship in the fleet volunteered to join what looked like a suicide attack on the most powerful warship in the galaxy. Roy felt tears in his eyes as he realized what they were about to do. 300 ships and crews willing to die rather than surrender their freedom. "All ships," Admiral Rodriguez said quietly, "it has been an honor serving with you, for Earth, for freedom, for the right to say no to tyranny." The human fleet charged toward the enemy flagship, their engines burning bright against the darkness of space. Behind them, their alien allies followed, adding their voices to humanity's war cry. The Battle of Kepler's Gate was about to reach its climax, and the galaxy would never be the same. The charge toward the enemy flagship lasted only minutes, but those minutes changed the course of galactic history. Admiral Ben Rodriguez watched from the bridge of the Liberty as 300 human ships and their alien allies streaked through space toward the massive Veltar dreadnought Harmony of Worlds. The enemy ship's weapons blazed like angry stars, destroying human vessels with each shot, but the fleet kept coming. "Sir," called Commander Kate Phillips, the Harmony of Worlds, "is turning away? They're trying to retreat?" Rodriguez couldn't believe what he was seeing. The most powerful warship in the galaxy, faced with what should have been an easy victory over desperate opponents, was running away. The sight of hundreds of ships willing to die rather than surrender had broken something in the enemy commanders. "Mind, all ships, concentrate fire on their engines," Rodriguez ordered. "Don't let them escape." The combined firepower of the human fleet and their allies struck the retreating dreadnought. The massive ship's shields flickered and failed. Secondary explosions rippled along her hull. The Harmony of Worlds, symbol of council, power, and authority, limped away from the battle with her engine smoking and her pride shattered. Across the battlefield, the tide had turned completely. Council forces that had expected an easy victory found themselves fighting for their lives against enemies who refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. Human ships darted between asteroids like deadly fish. Talvaxi warriors fought with 3 centuries of pent-up rage. Prexany industrial ships proved that tools could be weapons when wielded by free beings. Captain Roy Stevens guided the Defiant through the wreckage of what had been the largest fleet in galactic history. Disabled ships drifted between the asteroids. Escape pods fled toward the edges of the system. The combined fleet was not just defeated, it was broken. "Sir," called his communications officer, "we're getting surrender signals from 17 different enemy ships. They're requesting permission to withdraw." Roy looked at his tactical display and saw the truth. The Council forces were retreating. Ships that had arrived expecting to crush a minor rebellion were fleeing in panic from an enemy that fought like nothing they had ever encountered. "Let them go," Admiral Rodriguez's voice came over the fleet channel. We came here to defend our freedom, not to conquer others. Any ship that wants to leave can leave. The battle was over. Against impossible odds, humanity and its allies had won, but Roy knew the real victory was not in the destroyed ships or the fleeing enemies. The real victory was in what the battle represented, proof that free beings could defeat tyranny, no matter how powerful it seemed. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood once again in the Galactic Council chamber, but everything had changed. The vast hall that had once held 10,000 representatives now held less than half that number. Dozens of species had declared independence after the Battle of Kepler's Gate. Others had reformed their governments, throwing out the bureaucrats who had surrendered their freedom for promises of security. The human delegation was no longer a single chair. Representatives from 43 newly independent species sat with Jake in what was now called the Freedom Section. They had come not to beg for recognition or negotiate terms of surrender, but to establish a new kind of relationship with the old order. Council Prime Zeth Kar still occupied the central platform, but his crystal form seemed dimmer than before. The absolute authority he had once wielded was gone, shattered by humanity's simple refusal to submit. The Free Alliance presents the Kepler Accords, Jake announced, standing before the reduced council. These agreements establish a new framework for galactic cooperation based on voluntary participation and mutual respect. The Accords were everything the old council system was not. Species could choose their level of involvement in galactic affairs. Military cooperation was voluntary. Economic partnerships were based on fair trade rather than tribute. No species could be forced to follow laws they had not agreed to. "This is chaos," protested General Vexhai, though his scales showed more resignation than anger. "Without central authority, the galaxy will dissolve into war and disorder." Jake smiled the same smile he had worn when he first refused the Council's demands. "General, we've had 6 months to test that theory. The independent worlds are more prosperous than ever. Trade is flowing freely between species that were barely allowed to talk to each other under Council rule. The only disorder we've seen is from species throwing off dictators who claim to rule in the name of stability." President Lisa Carter had arrived on Harmony 7 the day before, making her the first human head of state to visit the station. She sat in the gallery, watching as her ambassador delivered humanity's vision for the future. "The galaxy learned something important from humanity's refusal," Jake continued. "Freedom is not something that can be taxed away, negotiated away, or surrendered for the sake of peace. It must be fought for, protected, and shared with others who have forgotten what it means to be free." The Zephyrian representative, Trilhai, spoke in his wind chime voice. "But what guarantee do we have that this new system will maintain peace? What prevents the strong from dominating the weak?" "The same thing that prevented the Council from destroying humanity," Jake replied. "The fact that free beings will always fight tyranny no matter what form it takes. The strong can only dominate the weak when the weak accept that domination. When they refuse to accept it, when they stand up and say no, the strong become just another group of bullies looking for someone else to push around." In the months following the Battle of Kepler's Gate, the changes had spread far beyond the species that fought in the battle. The Aratai had overthrown their hereditary monarchy and established a democracy. The Plavhan had dissolved their caste system and given rights to their worker classes. Even some of the species that remained in the Council had reformed their laws to give their citizens more freedom. Dr. Helen Chang, now serving as Earth's chief xenobiologist, had documented the phenomenon in a report that was being studied throughout the galaxy. Humanity's refusal to submit had acted like a virus, spreading the idea of freedom to species that had forgotten such concepts were possible. "What we witnessed," she had written, "was not just a military victory, but an awakening. Humanity's willingness to fight for their principles reminded other species of principles they had abandoned. The idea that beings could choose their own destiny, that authority must be earned rather than demanded, that the word no could be more powerful than the largest fleet. These concepts proved contagious in the best possible way." The Council session ended with the formal recognition of the Free Alliance and the signing of the Kepler Accords. As Jake left the chamber, he was approached by a young Hrexney diplomat named Vexcree, who had been elected to represent his people in the new system. Ambassador Morrison, the insect-like being said, "My people wanted me to ask you something. When you stood up to the council that day, when you said no to their demands, were you afraid?" Jake considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said finally, "I was terrified. I knew we might be choosing a war we couldn't win. I knew humanity might be destroyed for our defiance." "Then why did you do it?" Jake smiled. "Because some things are more important than being safe. Some things are worth dying for. And freedom, the right to make your own choices, to live your own life, to say no to anyone who tries to control you, that's one of those things." The young diplomat's compound eyes reflected understanding. "My people have a saying now. We learned it from humans. We say freedom is not free, but slavery costs more." As Jake walked through the corridors of Harmony 7, he passed representatives from dozens of species who had found their courage in humanity's example. The galaxy was no longer a place where authority was absolute and submission was expected. It had become a place where free beings could work together as equals, where the strong protected the weak instead of exploiting them, where the word no was respected as much as the word yes. The human delegation prepared to return to Earth, their mission accomplished. They had not just defended their own freedom, they had helped restore freedom to the galaxy. Humanity's one-word response to tyranny had become a rallying cry for beings across the stars. In the years that followed, whenever faced with unjust authority, oppressed beings would remember the species that looked power in the eye and refused to blink. They would remember that sometimes the most powerful weapon against tyranny was not a gun or a ship or an army. Sometimes it was simply the courage to say no.